Program Manager at the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. Thank you for being here today among the many events that are being hosted. Our discussion today is it's of course great importance and of urgency. We're going to look at the key gender-specific barriers to women's wealth accumulation in the Horn of Africa. Women have traditionally been very instrumental in mediation in their homes. They've been the backdrop of social fabric in their community. Yet we continue to see several barriers and challenges affecting women's participation in all spheres of life. So our discussion would go into the specific details of barriers that prevent women from achieving economic independence in the Horn of Africa, and then we'll spotlight Somalia, Uganda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. We'll look at legal, societal, and customary practices that hinder women's access to wealth and resources. We'll also look at issues relating to inheritance and succession laws, and how they intertwine with national and customary legal frames. As we know, these are not just law or legal texts, they are the bedrock of societal norms and the fabric of our daily lives. We'll also look at the significant influence of the generational economic empowerment or disempowerment of women in the region, and the disenfranchisement of women continues to stand as a formidable barrier to their inclusion in essential political and decision-making roles. As we all know, this is not just about economic justice, it's a prerequisite for meaningful engagement in political spaces and peace processes. I am honored to have with us on a panel of distinguished panelists and experts and activists, and each of them representing Somalia, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, will bring forward their unique perspectives, challenges, and opportunities for reform within the context. Let me start by introducing our first speaker, Zabib Lorum Musa, a feminist who holds several leadership positions, both at the national and regional level. She was the former chairperson of the East African Network of Health Organizations, and the current chairperson of the Network of Aid Services Organizations in South Sudan, a former coordinator of civil society security sector reform, and the convener of the Women Human Rights Defenders Forum. Zabib is the executive director of Women for Justice and Equality, WOJE, a local NGO in South Sudan supporting women's justice and economic empowerment. Faith, can you put Zabib's picture? Her. Thank you. I'm going to ask her to unmute and to start video. Zabib, while we're waiting for your camera to come on, can you tell us, as a peace activist, how do you see the connection between women's economic empowerment and their participation in peace building and political processes in South Sudan? 1 second, Zabib. Okay, try again.
Thank you very much, Faiza, and the rest of the team who are present and practically at the panel discussion there. I may limit my video just so that I can have a good internet from my end.
That is fine. Yes, that is fine. You can put up the video if it disrupts the internet.
All right.
Zabib, you've muted yourself. You've muted instead of the video. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So South Sudanese women, we say my question is to connect, to see the connection of women within peace building, economic empowerment, and their participation. Yes. I would say that South Sudanese women play an instrumental role in resolving past and ongoing conflicts in the country through their involvement in different spaces. We talk of their participation in mediations that take place. We've seen the mediations that happened in Addis Ababa that brought out the signing of the RC's agreement. Women had their participation into that as one of their initiatives for peace building. We see our women also involving in peace talks with the men, just to see that peace prevail in the country. And then women also have engaged in empowerment programs that are important in resolving ongoing conflicts within the communities. For example, we have women rights organizations that have been very instrumental in disseminating information of peace to the communities, providing psychosocial support. So these are programs that women have been doing so that peace prevails in our communities. And then we also know that during the referendum, for example, we had associations like the South Sudan Women General Association. We had SWAIN at that time. We had big organizations. We have EVE organizations that involved in the translation of the CPA into several local languages and disseminated this to all the states. So South Sudanese women have engaged in peace building work, in governance, and also having programs that economically empower women and also promote healing and reconciliation. The current peace building process in South Sudan offers an opportunity for promoting gender equity. We see that in our RCs, where the 35% affirmative action that was stipulated in the agreement to see that women are included in peace building programs and then the nation building. Women's economic empowerment is also something that is very crucial, and that women of South Sudan have taken steps, crucial steps of empowering themselves so that they can enjoy their rights as women. Although there is still little progress made in women's economic empowerment for South Sudanese women, yet it is an important aspect that can support women's social, political, and participation in the country. For example, I would say that when we improve women's access to services, then women will be more able to influence decisions at a household and public space as their expenditures will be made. Since women, when we know women, if women have money and they own their own money, then they have a higher voice in pushing for decisions at the table. They will have access, to the doors that are that rightly lead them to the public spaces. So we've seen that through the government's commitment to the international frameworks, such as the 1979 UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discriminations Against Women, the government of South Sudan committed to ensuring that women are able to access their economic rights freely and equally by fully acceding to the convention in 2015. The Women, Peace and Security agenda recognizes women's economic security as important to their broader security and affirms that women's economic rights under national laws should be consistent with the international standards. Although, despite these international standards, we also see that, yes, the international standards and then the RCs that gave the women the 35%, we see that South Sudan have consistently fallen short of protecting women's economic rights and also the security of the women. Despite the constitutional support, also in our constitution, we have that right of, our constitution gives a full right to all human beings. So we see that there is that support in the constitution for gender parity. But then women are not afforded the same protection within households and public lives, because our systems, our cultures assume that men are leaders by creation, and that they should be taking lead at the cost of women. So I think these are the conversations that I'd wanted to put forward, that women have tried, they have been involved in these programmings, they have been taking steps to have to see that peace prevails in South Sudan, to see that communities stay together, as most of the time we know that when conflict erupts, it affects women more oftenly, more times than men. So women as protectors of society, we find ourselves working so hard to see that peace prevails in our community. And that gender roles also changed in the country due to maybe conflicts, and also the situation, the environmental and climate change and everything that has been changing in country. We see that women have taken over the roles of men, that they take care of households, meaning that women are working so hard to see that economically they are empowered. So this is what I have for this question one.
Thank you, Zabib. That was very insightful. And you have mentioned very important that when women are given access to improved service delivery, then they would have a higher voice, and that would lead them to public spaces and also within their homes as well. I think it is a stark reminder that without economic independence, women's voices remain marginalized in crucial conversations on peace and reform. Building on Zabib's emphasis on economic empowerment, we would now explore the legal framework and societal norms that intersects with this issue in Somalia. Dika's work on the front lines in Mogadishu offers invaluable insights into this dynamic. Allow me to introduce Dika. Dika Udue is the Gender and Advocacy Manager at Somali Women's Development Center in Mogadishu. Dika specializes in advocating for women's rights and strengthening their roles in Somali communities. She formerly worked at the Swedish International Development Corporation Agency, SIDA, where she focused on issues relating to societal protection, human rights, and democracy in sub-Saharan Africa, or context rather. Dika has written on the experiences of migrants and refugees with higher education and wider society in Sweden and in South Africa, highlighting the challenges and opportunities they face, as well as the need for policies that are inclusive and facilitate integration. Dika, can you share with us the current status and the implication of Somalia's sexual offences bill, particularly in terms of how it's prioritizing protection of women against sexual violence, and how it can facilitate women's access to economic resources, what opportunities are there, and also thinking about it within the context of the conflict, always growing conflict in Somalia. Thank you. Yes. Is it on?
Thank you so much, Saizat. Thank you all for the ones that are joining online, the ones that are here. I would like to also extend my thankfulness to SIHA Network for inviting me to this very interesting and important panel discussion. So to start off without, to start off and understanding the sexual offences bill, this is not something that is crucially important today and to work on it today, but rather something that started years ago. So during our 15-year lifespan of the organization's Somali Women Development Center, we noticed that there was a huge significance for a sexual offense legislation with a growing prevalence of sexual violence. This is because without any legislation, our work of protecting women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence, that would lack legal basis. So advocating for the bill has been very central in regards to our work for over a decade. To provide you with a brief overview of SWDC's efforts in developing and advocating for the bill, Let's start already in 2012. During this period, our primary objective was to report as many cases as possible to showcase to not only the government but to the international community in regards to the challenges that women and girls are faced with on a daily basis, both those who live in the urban areas and the ones that live in the rural areas. Our endeavors did not go unnoticed, and by 2014, our actions had caught attention of the government, which led to the establishment of the Ministry for Women and Human Rights Development. Under the leadership of the late Minister Khadija Mohamediriya, in collaboration with SWDC, the initial draft of the Sexual Offences Bill was crafted in response to the alarming rate of sexual violence. Further on in 2017, with the appointment of a new minister, Mrs. Dika Yassin Yusuf, the bill was presented to the parliament. However, it faced constant oppositions on multiple fronts. Traditional leaders argued that the bill conflicted with Islam and Sharia law, that it clashed with Somali customs, that it was a Western ideology being imposed in an Islamic country, also that the bill was promoting LGBTQ messages, that the language directly translating from Sexual Offences Bill to Somali was also a huge misunderstanding. And all those misunderstandings by the stakeholders involved in this process, as well as the parliamentarians, led to increasing amount of criticisms. So undeterred by the setbacks and the bill being rejected in 2018, SWDC took it upon themselves to lead the advocacy for this bill with the Ministry of Women and Human Rights, as well as the legal experts. The aim was then to sort of unify the understanding of the Islamic values, but also the importance of establishing a bill or a policy that will protect these women and girls. For instance, one of the sexual offenses that the bill addresses is forced marriage. Article 12 states that anyone who marries another person without consent commits the crime of forced marriage. Moreover, the bill criminalizes the facilitation and arrangement of forced marriage under Article 12 with the consent of one of the parties. The article does not provide sufficient details to differentiate between an unmarried girl or woman and the case of widowed or divorced women. This is one of the situations where the incompatibility of civil law as well as Islamic Sharia law is important, whereas Islamic Sharia law allows the father to marry off his daughter to a man in some circumstances. However, if the father shares with his daughter that he wants to marry her off and she refuses openly, then the Sharia law states that this cannot happen, basically. And for the marriage of divorced or widowed women, Sharia requires the explicit verbal approval. So with forced marriage being very common in Somalia, and the girls are mostly the victims, as well as women who already from an early age that, for example, lives in an IDP community that does not have that many opportunities, they see marriage as an opportunity to become economically empowered. So despite the ongoing challenges, particularly from the religious leaders regarding the terminology, SWC continued to advocate and engage in the consultation processes with legal and religious experts to redefine the bill after it was rejected in 2018. So the public's understanding of the scope and the content of both the original and the amended bill on sexual offenses is very weak. Sensitivities has therefore been easily aroused and drowned out on constructive discussions. There is a need for a large-scale awareness-raise campaign, not only on a local or regional level, but also nationally and internationally as well. It is important to increase the awareness among policymakers and practitioners, as well as to engage the public discussion around the seriousness of such crimes that continues to happen on a daily basis. The amount of cases we receive every day is actually, it's heartbreaking, and it's very serious, and it's disappointing for not only the ones that actually can change this, does not take it seriously, but also that it's not internationally recognized. Finally, the current state of the bill. In August last year, the final draft of the sexual offences bill was submitted to the Parliament with support from various institutions and with an overwhelming backing from stakeholders. We're at the stage that we believe and we anticipate that minimal opposition will happen in regards to the bill's passage. And also referring back to the word itself, sexual offences bill being a terminology that is very much criticized, the ministry and the parliament, decided to change the terminology, and it was renamed as the Rape and Indecency Act. The enactment of this legislation will not only provide crucial legal protection for women and children, but will also explicitly outlaw all forms of sexual violence and abuse. It will empower women and girls to participate confidently in both private and public spheres, knowing that there are or there will be legal consequences for the perpetrators. So looking ahead, we really do hope that we assist law enforcement in establishing this legislation and continuing our collaboration with the ministry as well as our international partners and the government to further on advocate not only for the sexual offences bill, but also for other bills in regards to the FGM, in regards to family law, in regards to child rights, and etc. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dika. That was very insightful when you think about Somali legal landscape and then the impact of the sexual offences bill for women and girls. It also showed how, perseverance, you saw a gap and you try to, document that gap, give data and evidence to show that this is a problem, and you were heard. And it's been a long journey. It also shows that we don't necessarily achieve things easily. We've also seen how there was regression, and they continue to be, anti-gender rights movements. They continue to be backlash, but we're forging our way forward, and that's where Zemdena comes in. Zemdena will talk to us a little bit about the Ethiopia context and the the growing backlash on women's movement. Zemdena Abebe is SIA Network's Ethiopia Country Coordinator. She sits on the Advisory Council of Action Aid Ethiopia and is the founder of Afric Colors, a social enterprise startup. Zemdena is a Pan-Africanist, I don't want to miss this, Pan-Africanist womanist who refuses to be erased and amplifies the voices of women through her research, writing, multimedia, storytelling, organizing, and activism. She was one of the 22 young African women selected as part of the Writing for Social Change workshop organized by African Women Development Fund and FemRight, and also an alumnus of the prestigious Mandela Washington Fellowship. Zemdena's writings have been published in Pamzuka, Africa is a Country, PBF, and African Feminism, amongst others. Zemdena, there is growing backlash on women's movement and the anti-gender rights. In light of recent advancements in gender equality in Ethiopia, could you discuss any backlash against women's rights, particularly how this backlash is affecting access to economic resources and contributing to women's impoverishment?
Thank you very much, Faizat. And thanks for the nice introduction. And good to have you all in the room. Hello, everyone online as well. Before tapping into the question of the backlash against the women's movement and the milestones achieved in economic rights in Ethiopia, I think it's worth exploring the economic landscape in and itself. I think oftentimes when we talk about economy, we tend to divorce it from political conversations. And I think economics is very much political. Someone once said, when we talk about the economy, we're talking about resource management, or maybe sometimes resource mismanagement, particularly in our context. So the economy, or like the political space, is where you have a lot of decision making on who gets what and when. And that's where I think women are like oftentimes marginalized. It's in the political spaces, it's in the CSW, it's in the bigger, conversations. So I think it's always important not like just to underline the intersectionality between economy, social conversations, and the political landscape. So having said that, I think in Ethiopia, there were several milestones that were achieved, particularly in terms of allowing women to own land, to control land. The 1994 Constitution definitely allowed that. Particularly Article 35 of that Constitution grants women the right to land and resources, because at the end of the day, it's about economic emancipation, right? Also, Ethiopia is a signatory to important international frameworks like the Beijing Platform for Action, which also allows women to be economically assertive, economically empowered. But what we are facing in the country, despite some of the achievements that were made in the past years, recently there's a conversation around reversing the affirmative action. The affirmative action really allowed women to access education, to access economic power. But now the Ministry of Education is recalling that affirmative action. So this is one of like the significant challenges that the women's movement in the country is facing, because as you know, affirmative action is not something, people there's this misconception around affirmative action, because oftentimes society thinks, because you're a woman, you're privileged and you're just handed out these opportunities. But that is very far from the truth, because of the historical legacies and the social construct and the patriarchal capitalist culture that women find themselves in. Affirmative action is really necessary for economic empowerment, for political participation, for education. But right now we're also heavily challenged by that. Not only that, currently in Ethiopia, if a woman, like a female student, misses school for 15 days as a result of maternity leave, she will not be allowed to go back to school. So these are like the introduction of these new laws in the country is really, really significantly damaging the contributions that was made by the women's movement, and which paid a hefty price, to achieve some of these discriminatory policies. So the backlash can be seen at that level, the state apparatus, but also within the women's movement itself. There's a lot of fragmentation. Because again, the women's movement is diverse. It's complex. It has its own interests. It's fueled by multiple interests. So the gender agenda hasn't been brought to the front as it should be, as a result of the complexities of other identities and how they kind of get in the way of women coming as a united front. So this is something we're completely challenged with. And also the hierarchies and the elitism between the mainstream women movement and the grassroots women movement. And I think that's when SIHA comes in, and that's where we try to really narrow the gap by really, really asserting the autonomy and the power of women themselves. So we don't claim to work for women. We facilitate the space for women to work for themselves. So breaking that hierarchy is really important, because the backlash and the challenges, there's this really, really, mismatch between what's happening at, that so-called higher level and the thing that's happening on the ground. So it's always important to kind of navigate that space and deeply interrogate the power imbalance that exists, and then also underscore how multiple forms of oppression also work with each other. So patriarchy is the best friend of capitalism, is the best friend of white supremacy. Like, that is why, I mean, it's always important to understand where we come from and recognize, like, when you're talking about women in Ethiopia, you're talking about women in the Horn of Africa. And the Horn of Africa has its own specific dynamic. And I think that often gets erased, and I think that has a lot to do with the backlash and, you know, the removal from the wider conversation that happens elsewhere. So yes, as a country, in terms of the frameworks, the structure, the legislative framework, we have those important achievements, but they're also constantly being challenged, and the backfire exists as a result of the societal misconception, because at the end of the day, we exist within the society, and if we don't confront social norms, if we don't confront social thinking, which takes time, it's a gradual process, having the framework in paper is not going to be enough, because at the end of the day, it's going to be implemented by those who hold power. So in a nutshell, I think it can be summarized as such. I can get back to the challenges when we come back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Zemdemna. So many gems to take away from that. Gender agenda has not been brought to the front as it should be, and patriarchy is the best friend of capitalism. Those are words to hold by. But it's also a reminder that, you know, progress is not linear, and right gained can be threatened or rolled back at any time. And the need for us to continue, you know, our work and the activism that we do. Jackie, in light of Zendena's observation on the backlash and Dika's focus on the legal framework, and also Zabib's intervention about the situation in South Sudan, which, you know, we've seen how also the perspective of customary leaders is intertwined in women's independence and economic empowerment, and, you know, we've also seen how, you know, the traditional practices can also disadvantage women. But before I ask you your question, let me introduce you first. Jackie Osuna is a dedicated, passionate women's rights activist and the program manager at Uganda Association for Women's Lawyers, FIDA Uganda. With a background in law and extensive experience in project management, Jackie is committed to advancing gender equality and women's rights in Uganda. She oversees the planning, implementation, and evaluation of various programs aimed at promoting legal empowerment, access to justice, and advocacy for women and children. She works closely with stakeholders, including government agencies, NGOs, and community leaders to develop innovative strategies and initiatives that address unique challenges faced by women in Uganda legal system and the community at large. So Jackie, how does FIDA Uganda engage with traditional and community leaders to address customary laws and practices that disadvantage women economically? And what successes have you seen from this engagement? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Faizat. To our audience here in the room, hello, and to the people listening to us online, we are happy to be here with you. How have we engaged traditional leaders and cultural leaders? Our mode of working at FIDA Uganda is an association for women lawyers that is working in Uganda to promote, rights of women and children. So we are currently in 20 districts across the country, and in doing our work in advancing, access to justice for women and children, we leverage so much on informal justice actors. One, because of the sustainability nature of the work. but also the fact that with the informal justice actors, they help us to reach the grassroots communities. And that's where now we find the traditional leaders, they complement our work in taking the message down to the community members. So that has been a sustainability mechanism that we have used as an institution, but also it has helped us to front the message. The message is well received if it's coming from people within the community themselves. But also we understand that the traditional leaders and any other community leaders wield a lot of influence over their communities. So instead of seeing a lawyer from Kampala coming to the community, and talking about issues of human rights, issues of women's economic empowerment, we would rather go through their leaders themselves, who will know how to package this message and also ensure that the message is positively, received by the community members themselves. So that has been our strategy, that in all the projects that we are implementing, we make it a point to have informal justice actors. Normally we call them community legal volunteers in our institution. So they form part of our implementation team. And in here we have traditional leaders being part of the, of this group of people. They go through a number of trainings. So we have like a big training where we teach them about women's rights, issues of access to justice, how it is that they can handle cases, what cases can they handle, where it is that they can refer cases. But then also we continue with the constant engagements on like a monthly basis, whereby we always conduct needs assessments. They tell us some of the issues that are affecting the different, the different communities where they come from, and then we package different trainings for them. But also the bigger part is to ensure that they then sensitize the communities, that we put them at a level whereby they can easily interrogate some of these legal issues and pass them on to their different community members. So that's how we have engaged mainly with the community legal with the cultural leaders, and also leveraged so much on the power that they wield over the communities. We have also engaged them in platforms of knowledge sharings, but not only at their community level, but also at national level. That when we have national events that are talking about issues that are affecting, women, children across the country, but also talking about issues of economic empowerment, we are intentional in making sure that they attend these platforms and, pick a few issues here and there and go back to their communities and, pass on the message. But also they have played a key role in issues of advocacy. Yeah, that when it comes to advocating for some of the issues that are affecting women within the country, they have taken, center stage in talking about these issues. So that has been our strategy in working with them. Like I mentioned, we have also collaborated with them in handling cases. I will give you an example that in some communities, people are very reluctant in approaching the justice mechanisms, lawyers, police, and all that, because of different reasons, and they all have their stories as to why they're very reluctant in approaching those communities. But yet, they can easily talk to a cultural leader. They can easily talk to a community leader within the community, Mm-hmm. So if we train these people to be able to handle cases of, different violations within the community, then it will help us in enhancing access to justice within the communities where they are operating. We have also been very intentional in engaging them on different advocacy platforms, but also coming up with guidelines. I think a clear example has been in the Karamoja region within Uganda, but also in northern Uganda, the Kekwar, how we've worked with them. In northern Uganda specifically, we've had survivors of the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA war, and these have come with multiple challenges when it comes to reintegration, when it comes to issues of property, when it comes to recognition of their children as also benefiting from the property within the community. So because of the effect of the war on them and the fact that most of them were displaced for a long period of time, when it came to reintegrating them, the community shunned them away, and they did not recognize them. But also they did not recognize their children because they were not born of that area. So then when it comes to getting things like identification, even national identification was a challenge, benefiting from the property, issues of economic empowerment, and also benefiting from the government initiatives that have been brought on economic empowerment, it had been a challenge. So then we had to go through the cultural institution of the region to for mindset change and for them to be the first to recognize these people, and then they will trickle the message down to the community. But also for all the cases that we were handling on issues of property ownership and passing on property to some of these people, that when we went through the cultural institution, it became a bit easier to address some of those property cases. That with time now we started seeing the cultural leaders themselves and different clan leaders referring cases to us. So then you start seeing a mindset change, and that has been our biggest success. It has also worked very well for us in Karamoja, whereby now on a cultural institution you see them making pronouncements, various pronouncements on women's rights, but also recognizing that women can sit on some of these platforms. In northern Uganda specifically, I think now women have started sitting on some of the cultural, institution committees, which wasn't the case. So that now they also have a platform where they can specifically talk about the issues that are affecting, different women within the community, and it's not just the voice of the men being represented on this table. Then now we see they're also opening up to the youth and addressing key issues. I'll give you an example of Karamoja, where we have the courtship rape, and that is something that had been normalized in that region. That when you're a man and you're ready to get a wife, you just identify a woman and rape her, then she becomes your wife. Yeah, so it takes a lot of unlearning and engaging them and trying to help them understand that issues of consent are key when it comes to people choosing their life partners, but also the age, the children, like the children shouldn't be engaged in sexual acts. There's an age for which a person should be free to consent to be married. So we've come up with principles, principles that are now going to guide them, and they've welcomed these issues. So you see that now there's positive attitude towards some of these issues with regards to human rights and all that. So positive mindset has been our biggest win when working with the cultural institutions. The fact that they can also speak about their issues, they can advocate for rights, they can refer cases, they can completely handle cases. That on some occasions they reach out to FIDA Uganda and ask us to sit on their committee to ensure that whichever way they are handling cases, it's engendered, and that they are doing it with a gender-sensitive lens. So that has been a win for us. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do and constant engagement with them, but we are positive that going through that direction can help us push the message down to the community.
Thank you, Jackie. As you said, positive mindset, those are one of the very important tools for us to change the social norms in the community, and then engaging with the traditional institutions themselves, but also ensuring diversity in the customary and traditional settings. Now engaging women as part of the decision makers and youths would also go a long way. Now, of course, we know that at CIHA, we work in the Horn of Africa, including the countries on this panel and other countries. And majority of these countries are either conflict or post-conflict settings. So it's also important for us to dissect a little bit into how the conflict affects, women's empowerment. So I'm going to come back to you, Dika, and for you to kind of, talk about the role of conflicts in women's economic disempowerment and how it reinforces the need for holistic strategies that addresses both immediate security concerns and long-term economic inclusion. So kind of just now talking more of strategies of way forward. I would also say that I know we all agreed that we had 5 minutes, but I'm cutting that 5 minutes to 3 minutes so that we can get questions from the audience. We already started receiving some.
Thank you so much. So as we delve deeper into the discussion on women's rights and economic empowerment in Somalia, it is very imperative to understand or rather recognize the multifaceted drivers that hinders progress in this crucial area. So we have traditional social norms that still prevail. My colleague Zemdena touched upon patriarchy, which is very much evident in Somalia. We have deeply entrenched beliefs and institutionalized gender roles, which has perpetuated a system that subjugates women. And these norms do not only limit women's opportunities, but it also perpetuates harmful stereotypes and behaviors, which undermines economic, or rather their economic empowerment. We also have a pervasive influence of clanism in Somalia. Somalia is has a clan-based system, which excludes the marginalized groups, the minorities, and people who do not come from the major clans in Somalia. Ever since the collapse of the central government in 1991, Somalia has suffered from weak governance, and that has compounded tremendous challenges, leaving women with adequate basic services, especially those living in the outskirts of the capital, for instance, but also lack of protection in terms of when they're being exposed to either exploitation, discrimination, or violence. So the lack of both the physical and the legal protection has left women to become very vulnerable. These drivers of inequality and injustice has underscored the urgent need for comprehensive and coordinated action to address the root causes of women's economic disempowerment, and also to challenge the traditional norms, to dismantle the clan-based system, to strengthen governance structures and ensure that women have access to both legal protection and the physical security. Unfortunately, this is not something that a lot of women are not even aware of. When they have gone through, for instance, sexual violence or gender-based violence, some people do not even know who to turn to, that they have the right to report the person, that they have the right to seek service for the mental and physical well-being. So when speaking of strategies to overcome these challenges, there are many, but obviously support is needed. For instance, in 2021, Somalia's Ministry of Women established a national action plan for the implementation of the Somali Women's Charter, as well as the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, in collaboration with UN Women. And in September last year, SWDC was actually handed by the policy, handed over the documents to SWDC, being the lead organization to establish a civil society platform working group and to drive this initiative forward. However, saying that, and this is also touching on what Zemdena said regarding having policies or laws, but there are no implementation of it.
Yeah.
And mostly, this is, I would say, mostly because of the lack of understanding of the importance of it, but also there's no funding for it. And this being a document that was established in 2021, and this plan is supposed to last to 2025, nothing has been done yet. There's no funding for it yet. Yet you ask yourself, what is the purpose of this then if we cannot do the work, right? Another milestone actually was earlier this month, the African Women Leaders Network was established in Somalia, the Somalia Charter, so it became the 34th country. And this is something that can enhance, especially women who are in marginalized communities, to be given a platform where the core objectives of this network is to focus on the pillars of governance, peace and security, finance and women's entrepreneurship, We have youth leadership, as well as agriculture and social mobilization. So these initiatives are great, obviously, for not only addressing the challenges, but to also provide women with a greater space to try exactly. So with that being said, I would say also that there is a strong need for research to be done. Obviously, there is lack of research on the root causes of women's disempowerment, economic empowerment, but also to have Somali women and girls, or Somali marginalized women and girls, I would say as well, to write their own narratives on their experiences, that their voices and experiences are being heard by the government, by the international partners that work in Somalia. So these must be amplified in order to reach a more inclusive and effective peace-building effort. I think I can stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, profound. You've talked about the clanism, weak governance, and addressing the root causes. You've given us some very concrete strategies, including the need for the National Action Plan, the implementation of the National Action Plan, which has been handed over to your organization to lead, but there's literally no funding either way to drive that. And also the need for strong research. Evidence-based advocacy or evidence generation is very critical and important to our work. So I'm going to turn over to Zabib, building on Dika's insights on the security situation and some of the challenges that and some strategies that she has shared. If you're considering South Sudan's relatively recent the independence and the ongoing internal conflict, what are some specific challenges women face in accessing economic opportunities, and how can this be addressed at grassroots level but also at policy level? Zabib. One second.
Foremost, one of the biggest challenges is that there is a lack of political will among our leaders, among the leadership of the country, meaning that you find that you'll see that institutions that are there to empower women, talk of institutions like the Ministry of Gender, you'll find that the budget that is allocated to the Ministry of Gender is too small to nothing by the government. So there is no political will, and the support that comes from the Ministry of Gender is from the donors. It's not even enough to take care of issues of women. The Ministry of Health itself, where women's health depend, also is underfunded by the government. So the whole empowerment of women is dependent on donors. So it is important that political will is there as the first step, then everything else will follow. Like the donor will be also supported by the government funds, then it will be easier for women to have their empowerment as required. You see that because of the lack of political will, there is no full implementation of the frameworks that we have acceded to as a country. The CEDAW has been implemented partially. The Maputo Protocol, it's staggering since its enactment last year. We see that there is that sluggishness in when it comes to issues of women. The National Action Plan itself, we have the National Action Plan too that is still in a draft form, but for quite a long time, its approval has taken time. So these are clear signs that there is a huge lack of political will that needs to be taken care of. The other thing I would say is the recurrent conflict, the conflict that is continuously coming up. We have so many pockets of conflict that you find that women of Bahar Ghazal will be having initiatives and a lot of programs taking place, empowering them, but then you find that a conflict erupts from nowhere and they fall back again into problems of running here and there. And also the patriarchal nature of our society as South Sudan, you find that a lot of our societies are associated to the customary laws, which hinders women's participation in public life and also economic independency. Talk of ethnic politics, which affect women also a lot. And these ethnic politics are usually fueled by the patriarchal system and also the men who feel like it is their seat all the time. And when they start picking on ethnicity, you find that a woman who aspires to step into the public space, and yes, I am married to another community, my community will tell me to go and stand in the seat of the community where I was married. And when you go there also to stand into, to put out what you want, they will also send you back most of the time that this one was not born in our community, so her seat should be where she was born. Then they remain in the middle with issues of dilemmas around that. And then institutions that are directly linked to women empowerment are not given priorities by government. And also we see that even the donor funding that come to women rights organizations and networks is still not enough. There is that gap that still continues. You find that gender-based violence programming will usually be mainstreamed and not approached as independent activity projects that will be implemented as GBV prevention. You find that most of the time there is mainstreaming of women programs, women empowerment programs. The way forward on how this could be done, I think one of the things is that we need to have that political will. We need to have our leaders' political will and the political will of even our community people. Much as we look at our politicians as the people who make decisions on our behalf, men in control, we also see that there is a lot of power within the local communities where the customary laws work a lot, whereby cases of women will be taken even from the high court to the lower courts of customary. So there is that connection that has to happen where these customary courts have to understand that women's rights are crucial and are supposed to be handled with care. We also see that one of the other things that I had skipped, I think, is also the lack of accountability of perpetrators of violence against women. The more we move with our perpetrators in the society and we know that they have not been held accountable, it affects women a lot. You having your rapist sitting in a leadership seat, it does not motivate you to also come into the leadership seat. So I'm also happy to tell you, Faisal, that we have this case that has been ongoing for quite a long time of sexual violence for the last two years. And today was the final hearing, and I'm yet to update on what has happened. So the other thing is the equal economic empowerment between the sexes. Our country should also consider equal economic empowerment between the sexes. Whatever is given to the men as economic empowerment should be given to us women because we are human beings and that we are equal in front of God. We are equal in our society without discrimination. For example, the loans. We see a lot of money that comes in South Sudan, the oil money. The oil money benefits men most of the time, and it does not benefit women at any point. So we also, I will also talk about the enaction of policies like, let's say, the laws, the bills, the family law bills, the anti-GBV.
Zabib, I think we lost you.
So actionize equal implementation, and then inclusive education for women to reduce illiteracy within the society.
Zabib, we lost you again.
Inclusive education for women to reduce illiteracy, then strengthen the capacity of women's institutions, including the relying ministries, the Ministry of Gender, the women rights organizations and networks. They need to be funded, they need to be given enough support so that we see women's programs, women's initiatives going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zabib. I particularly took note of, I particularly took note of your comments, about how lack of accountability affects women. And just also wanted to add that not only that it affects women in terms of them seeing that they did not get justice, but it also continues to perpetuate the cycle of violence. It continues to allow it to occur in the community because they know that there's no accountability whatsoever. But that being said, you've highlighted critical issues and it's sounding, very similar across the region: lack of political will, the need for the line ministries to be adequately funded so that they can implement, but also not just that, CSOs and women rights organizations working on these issues. I think 2 organizations recently released reports that kind of looks at women's rights. Where did the money go to? There's a lot of funding to women's rights organizations, but how many women's rights organizations are actually being funded or receiving those funds? So, and then I'm seeing similarities between the clanism in Somalia and then the ethnic politics in South Sudan, and then also, the need of including the local communities because the powers also lie there. So I'm going to come back to you, Jackie. FIDA Uganda has been instrumental in advocating women's rights. So I would say just share with us one of the most significant legal challenges and victories in Uganda regarding women's property and inheritance rights.
Thank you so much. So FIDA Uganda has looked at issues of economic empowerment of women as a way, like by addressing issues of economic empowerment, then you're sort of handling the grassroots causes, of violence against women, because most of the cases we receive rotate around, lack of empowerment of women, and then that makes them more susceptible to abuse. That's the reason why they remain in abusive marriages. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why they do not speak up. So with economic empowerment, then comes the issue of agency and voice. Then they can be able to, speak about the issues that are affecting them, but also seek redress from the different, justice actors and address some of the issues that they are seeking. So through our strategic litigation efforts, we have, we have taken on cases that enhance property, women's property rights. Of course, the first one was our FIDA Uganda case against the Attorney General, where we brought it to the Constitutional Court to, nullify some of the provisions of the Divorce Act that were not recognizing, gender equality when it comes to grounds of divorce. But then also when it comes to grounds of divorce, then it also comes with, with issues of dealing with property. So if the grounds for divorce are more stringent for women, then it's also going to affect, the issue of, property distribution at that level. But then also we have been intentional in looking at, issues around cohabitation, that from the cases that we receive in our legal aid clinics, most of the women who approach us are actually not in legally, recognized marriages in the country. They are cohabiting. Some do not even know that they are in cohabitation. Some do, but it's beyond them, right? Because of the patriarchal, you are not going to come through and ask a man, to marry you off, so that then your rights over property are more protected. So because of the different levels of vulnerability, women find themselves in this position. So we have taken on this campaign on, recognition of property rights for women in cohabitation relationships, and we have filed a case case, but also we are taking on an advocacy nature through different platforms, that while we have the case moving, we can also engage with different stakeholders, including people at community level, so that this can be achieved, and that women's property rights can be recognized at that level. Of course, we've also collaborated with different stakeholders. We have cultural institutions still coming through here. We have the Uganda Land Board, which is within the central area, whereby we have sensitized communities on issues to do with property rights for women. But also we have worked with banks because with the resources, then women can be able to even acquire property in their own names. And where the sensitization then accompanies this is for women to be alert, right? Right now, without a legal framework, and if you're not in a recognized marriage, then what can back you is the fact that your property should be in your name, which most people do not understand at this level. So of course, through the sensitizations, then we are telling them, when the worst comes to the worst, at least ensure that your name appears on that title. And you shouldn't only be signing as a witness, which has been the case for many of them. So they come saying, I signed on that land title, and when you check it, they signed as a witness, not as a co-owner. So a lot of sensitization has been going on, coupled with, of course, the cases that we are filing in court. But sensitization for us is like a preventative mechanism. Like, don't wait for an incident to occur. Be alert. Look out for some of these things. Of course, the biggest challenges still that are affecting us is the deeply rooted, patriarchal systems. That even when we have all these advancements in place, for them to trickle down to the community, and for you to help the community to unlearn that, women also should be recognized as owners of property, that when a woman has lost her husband, they should not be chased off the property. They should not be, for their property to be, for their security to be determined on the property, they should not be inherited. For them to now have ownership. Of course, the customary regime, patriarchal coupled with the customary regime, that also has been an issue. Cohabitation still remains a challenge because there is no legal framework. So right now what we have is mediation, that when a case comes to us, we have to ensure that it is handled at mediation level, because after that point, we do not have a legal backing. We cannot go to court. For a cohabitation case, because we do not have a legal backing. So that also still remains a challenge for us. And of course, property rights coupled with economic empowerment, that goes hand in hand. And as FIDA Uganda, we have adopted what we call the same model, the self-actualization model of economic empowerment. So that's what completes our holistic legal aid, service provision, that when a case comes to us, we are intentional in ensuring that the woman who has approached us in our legal aid clinic for this maintenance case has something that is more sustainable, that we advise them in a more sustainable manner. But also we've partnered with different organizations. We work very closely with the Ministry of Gender to ensure that they benefit from some of these economic empowerment initiatives. But also, and for me, that now what we need to work on here is that even if the initiatives are there that are targeting women, are the women actually benefiting from them, or am I going to get the money and then it goes back to the man that I am living with? So those are some of the things that now we are working at to ensure that even when the initiatives are there, they should actually benefit the women. Then, of course, lastly, the biggest challenge has been, when it comes to economic empowerment and all these government initiatives, has been the corruption. Those are cases that we have also received, that even when women have organized themselves to go and benefit from these initiatives, they are not taking all the money. There's like a cut that has to go to the person, who is handling this. And at the end of it, the money that you're left with cannot do much for you. Yes.
No, thank you very much, Jackie. Very interesting to learn about the same model. I think it's something that, as women rights organization, we can also look into. Strategic litigation is always very impactful because it's widespread. It doesn't only resolve one issue, but it resolves the issue for, majority of the community. And you've also talked about, the issues with cohabitation and highlighted the importance of sensitization. So those are real critical takeaways for us. So we're going to wrap up the panel discussion with Zendena, who would also share with us, from the perspective of Ethiopia, and then also looking at their strides in gender equality, some of the lessons that we can learn from the Ethiopia experience.
I was just consumed in the conversation, so I have to think what I was going to say. What can we learn from Ethiopia? I think like earlier when I was talking about how Africa is integrated in the global economic system, I think one thing that's worth mentioning is like the structural adjustment, the SAP, and how it's really impacted a lot of our economies, and also climate change, consumerism, and how we at the Southern Hemisphere are like extremely impacted by that. Like I think we tend to forget these conversations, and our conversations, as much as it's important to talk about Faizat, about the informal economy and women's contribution, I think we need to also heavily invest in the macroeconomic level conversations. And I think a lot of us need to educate ourselves. For instance, like how many of us know the illicit financial flows, like, how much money that goes out of Africa and how that really, really impacts our day-to-day life. It's not really African women, Horn of Africa women do the most. It's not a matter of whether you work or not, but you're not, yielding the fruits of your labor because of, again, capitalism. So realizing that the Ethiopian government in the past, to mitigate, some of these hindrances that occurred as a result of the SAP, had this idea of an agricultural-led industrialization. This is basically the principle of, because of 75% of the population resides in the rural area, and women really contribute to that sector. It's really important to also like heavily invest in that and try to mitigate this heavily extractive industries, and how women contribute to that. So but then again, we come back to the issue of conflict and the rising conflict in the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia, and the inflation rates, and how that has like extremely disrupted some of the gains that were made by women. So yes, there were some attempts at the federal level, at the government level, also private-public partnership. A lot of women were accessing credit from banks. The banks were also, they had the social schemes that allow women to, support themselves. But to me, again, yes, political will, but nobody's going to give up power there's no will. Like the will is not there. I think this framing of political will, we have to organize ourselves and we have to agitate for change. Like nobody's going to hand these things to us. Like we talk about empowerment, who's going to empower us? Like we have every right to be in those spaces as much as anyone else. So I think it's really, really important to, assert that. But also in Ethiopia, we have the gender policy framework, which also at least gives us, the leeway to get into those economic support mechanisms. But to me, it's always important to work and invest in ourselves. I just want to share this story that always pops up in my head when we talk about the economy. One of my role models, a really hardcore feminist Ethiopian woman, she used to be the government spokesperson at some point. This is an independent woman, really nice, someone I looked up to when I was younger. And one time, she had an interview on BBC, and she was on the phone. Like, you know, she's talking about changing the political system. She's having these higher conversations, and she's having that phone call at home. And then her domestic worker like comes up to her, and then she's like, Madam, we ran out of cooking oil. Like, you know, you are, like, in essence, you're out here trying to talk about politics, but then again at home, you're talking about like cooking oil, you know what I mean? Yes, like, and I guess, yes. So it happens to a lot of us, but that whole dichotomy of, you know, the private public and like where women are constantly saturated. But it's always important to invest in ourselves, to organize. I think the role of civil society and what we're doing. For instance, as SIHA, I really want to talk about this. We work closely with self-help groups, but we also make sure that their political consciousness and education is there so that they understand global political systems. Because without that education, they're just left on their own. So heavily investing on knowledge production, education, and, you know, that awareness is quite important. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I was giving you the look, but because I also want to ask you a question, and somebody came in 6 minutes ago to say we have 10 minutes left, so I think we have 3 minutes, and I wanted to at least get, we have 2 questions that I'll pick from the audience. I already have it here, and then from the online audience, and then I think if we have the chance to take one from in the room. So Zemdena, and that's why I wanted to cut in. I think you might have covered this already, so if you have, just say this, and make it very quick. So the lady from Ethiopia stated that Horn of Africa has unique challenges. How do you support women in grassroots communities who face injustice due to border conflicts, for example, cattle rustling issues between Ethiopia and Kenya? Secondly, how do you empower women in grassroots communities who have local knowledge of land, managing climate change, especially added issues of food security, displacement, lack of political support from main government, and limited fund? I know it's a lot, but and I think you did cover some of it. So I'll let you answer, but I also wanted to pass on a question for Dika, and then I'll give you guys 1 minute each to respond. Second question from audience, could you share how violations religious freedom, especially violation of freedom of conscience in the Horn of Africa, affects women's rights? And I also leave that to any of you to respond. So Dika, if you want to take it, or Jackie. All right. And then we'll take one from the audience when we finish this.
Yeah. So, like, how do we support women, or like, how do we work with women in our communities, right? First and foremost, the way like we work and the way a lot of our projects or like programs are organized is in the sense that we co-create, like whatever we're trying to achieve, we design it together. So I think that's a key strategy in terms of like engaging women at the grassroots level, because it's a collective effort. And how we do that is, like, for instance, one of our thematic areas is supporting migrant returnee women and assisting them to come and form into an association so that they are assertive enough, empowered enough, to tackle on some of the challenges that comes with it. So one of the things is around, for instance, financial literacy, because without the skills, like sometimes, yes, you could have like the capacity to make ends meet somehow, but if you don't have like the tools to kind of like support yourself, you kind of like, don't sustain the little amount of money you make. So we really support women, migrant returnee women, women that are in collectives. We haven't done a lot with, at least in Ethiopia, with farmers and the Farmers Association and women, but this is also something we want to work on increasingly, especially in light of the impact of climate change. So these are like some of our plans for the year ahead. But like we do work with migrant returnees and self-help groups, particularly to mitigate urban poverty.
Yeah, and we do work with market women cooperatives. We work with street vendors, informal workers, domestic workers. So we support initiatives like that. So Dika, do you want to take the second one, or Jackie? Any of you, yeah.
So the second question was regarding how violations on religious freedom affect women's lives in the Horn of Africa. And I would say in Somalia specifically, they value Somali citizens value religious leaders a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, as long as you can be vocal, but if that does not correspond to the religious laws or the Sharia law that prevails in Somalia, that pretty much you don't have any freedom. Yeah. So it does not really matter whether you have something that even can actually be prescribed in the Sharia law. However, with the religious leaders, you also have the traditional leaders. So what's often gets mixed is that when you basically, I would say, when you take religious values and incorporate it with the cultural,
yeah.
And that's a big issue in Somalia. I don't know if Jackie has anything to add.
Not so different from what you've said, recognizing that religious leaders actually play a key role, just like the cultural leaders. They also wield a lot of authority over the people that they lead in the different sects of religion. So they are key stakeholders to have on board, but then there's also a lot of work with them and making them understand some of these principles, because most times with issues to do with women's rights and all that, they are a bit divided, depending on the different sects, but they are key people to have as stakeholders, and engaging them constantly so that they can also voice our issues.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from Lillian. You hand your hand up. I don't know if any other person has any question. Go ahead.
Okay. So mine is a comment, and it is on for us as women rights activists to heighten our consciousness to the context that we are working in. All the issues we are talking about, climate, justice, conflict, all of those things disproportionately affect women, together with, of course, the ongoing economic distress. And these are issues that cut across the region. And what came to mind was the backlash that we are talking about. The backlash is upon us. Some of it is overt, some of it very, very subtle. I think in the last week, in the 2 local dailies, there were two different authors questioning women emancipation and whether it's not a threat to the family unit, and such comments that are coming through media and other sources of information. So for us as women rights activists to buckle up and to re-strategize, reorganize, so that we can counter this backlash. I think that would be a good way to to end this conversation here and to plan on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies, we couldn't take more questions. There was a question for FIDA that I would share with you after this panel. I just want to take a quick opportunity to thank our panelists for their contribution. All of you individually, collectively, your dedication to women's rights. It's the discussion has shown that it's important for us to have a collaborative work, and the importance of feminist movement being collaborative in addressing these systemic barriers in the Horn of Africa. But before we finally close, I also want to express gratitude to our donors, Global Affairs Canada, the Ministry of Netherlands under the Strengthening Civil Society Partnership, the Comboa Consortium led by African Women Development Fund, and then the United Nations Trust Fund. Their support is very essential for us to be able to hold these kind of conversations that are very critical and important in times like this. So thank you everyone, and for your participation and commitment to this issue. We're really grateful, and have a great day.